There you go, Mayor Rumbas. We are streaming live on YouTube and recording as well for internal records.
Perfect. I will call the meeting to order. This is a presentation of the long-term facilities needs assessment meeting. And I'll remind everyone to please disclose of any pecuniary interest they may have at the appropriate time. And we'll go right to the presentations. I'll turn the meeting over to Ms. Goebbels.
Thank you, Mayor Rumbas. Welcome everyone, and to our special guests as well. I will watch the waiting room. We are expecting some additional personnel to join our call today. To start off, though, I thought since it's been a while since we talked about this topic, I'd start with just a very brief background report or presentation for council, and you'll see a variety of background documents there for your information, citing back to some previous discussions that we've had. So I'll just share my screen and briefly go through kind of the background presentation with everyone, but I will keep it brief. Of course, if you have questions, though, you know they're welcome at all times, and I can't see you, so feel free to, Mayor, to let me know. To start, you know, we're here to discuss the long-term facility needs assessment project, and this was a project focused on reviewing three of our municipal facilities: the Watford Fire Station, the Warwick Public Works Garage, and the Watford Public Works or shared Public Works and Parks and Rec Garage also, and their long-term needs, potential for amalgamation. So to start off with, the discussion was council had some expenditures to address needs at these facilities budgeted in 2020 and 2021. But questions arose as to this, if these were strategic expenditures, given some of the long-term needs and the volume of impacts or some repairs that were required at all facilities. So there were also some potential improvements and or recommendations around amalgamation of facilities in the strategic plan, more specifically the service delivery review resulting from the strategic plan priority. And we talked about previously as a council and staff team looking at the big picture, knowing that the decisions of this council regarding these facilities would impact the feasibility of future options for all three of the municipal facilities. And there was a discussion or recognition on that, you know, money on upkeep and maintenance is required. And really, we just wanted to look at whether there was an opportunity for some savings through some other options other than just renewing our existing assets. So you recall that we did complete the facility needs assessment back a few years ago. And this is just here for your information to outline some of the needs and number of life cycle events that are outlined at our existing municipal facilities. So it's just for your information. Specifically related to the facilities that we're talking about today, we had previously pulled out from those facility condition assessments some 5-year totals in terms of expenditures required to maintain and enhance the facilities. So these figures were previously provided to council. And one thing to note is that at the time these were provided, these don't necessarily include any enhancements to the facility. So they're focused on maintaining each of the assets individually and keeping them up to date, not enhancing operations or service at any of them. Following that review, council did approve at the beginning of 2021 deferring an existing budgeted expenditure to add a new salt shed and wash bay at the Warwick Garage property, and directed staff to obtain a consultant to include more detailed analysis and report back to council to support the 2022 budget formation. So with that in mind, we did, as a staff team, create a scope of work, which is included for your reference as one of those many background documents on the agenda. And as a result of that scope of work, we were able to retain CBRE, and they're present here tonight, to complete the assessment for us. And the goal really was to have a third party complete a comprehensive analysis identify efficiency opportunities and costs, and a number of alternatives. So the intent was to help support council's decision making by looking at the long-term lifespan of each of our assets, and as well as the immediate needs. One of the first steps of the study after we engaged CBRE was to complete site visits at all 3 of the locations. As a result of that first site visit at the Watford Fire Station, there were some, I'll say, concerns identified by CBRE about the structural nature and some potential hazards at the Watford Fire Station. And at their recommendation, and very strong recommendation, we did seek to engage specialty structural engineering consultant to complete a specific assessment at the Watford Fire Station. And again, that was on recommendation based on their initial site visit. So we've been working with both consultants throughout 2021. And as you know, the 2022 proposed budget does include some expenditures to address some needs at our facilities, specifically the Watford Fire Station. So that's there for you. And so that's just the background. Obviously, the next steps are we're here today for that. That's why we've called this special meeting, to have both of our consultants present to us their findings and have council have the opportunity to ask questions and get some feedback from them directly. The intent is that this presentation will help support council's 2022 budget deliberations coming up very, very soon, and give council the information that they need to address any either immediate expenditures for the Watford Fire Station and or long-term facility needs improvements kind of priorities and projects. And of course, any implementation of these budget projects would be guided by council's direction. So that's just my background presentation. If there's any questions or concerns, but back to you, Mayor Rumbat.
Thank you very much for that. Council, do we have any questions for Amanda at this time? All right, then we will turn it over to our consultants to go over their presentation and their findings from this study.
So it's Rick Takas here. Could I ask that we screen share and I'll do the PowerPoint on my side? Is that best?
Yep, absolutely.
And so share the screen with myself, and Yoni will speak first on the introductory side, and then I'll walk through the PowerPoint.
And would you prefer questions while you're going or at the end?
I think what is going to be most useful is I'm going to discuss the 3 assets individually, and I'll pause at the end of each one in terms of where the assets are today and capital needs. Quick question on each one, and then at the end, the high level discussion around amalgamation. So I think probably a couple of touch points is best. There's a lot of information here. I'm not sure, am I sharing to you or are you sharing to me?
I believe Ms.
Sorry, I thought you said you were looking to share the screen, Rick, or would you like me to do that and flip the slides?
So am I sharing my screen, Yoni?
You currently are sharing your screen. It's just a Zoom screen, though, not the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I have, okay. Bear with me. I'm on a different, I've got it on a second monitor here, but I'll just drag it in.
There you go. We can see it now. Thanks, Rick.
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, Yoni, you can start.
Thanks, Rick. Just a really quick introduction of myself and Rick. We are from the CBRE Asset Management team, and we were engaged on this topic, I want to say last spring into the summer, after which Rick attended the sites, reviewed the buildings, provided updates to previous building condition assessments that we'd completed a few years prior, which served as the basis for the reports that Rick will share with you soon. Rick is one of our senior assessors responsible for technical and special projects. and I am the Director of Asset Management from CBRE. So Rick, I think we can jump just quickly. He'll cover 3 topics. He mentioned or 4 rather, the 3 assets here, and then amalgamation scenario for those. And Rick, floor is yours.
Okay, good. Thanks, Yoni. All right, so I'm aware there's a lot of information here. I'll jump right into it. So these are the 3 assets that we're considering. The mandate here is to consider an amalgamation scenario. So what are your investment needs today, but going forward for the long term, which is generally viewed as 20 years, in the light of community growth, what are the drivers for investment? What upgrades in capacity or new buildings or new services do you need? So that's what the amalgamation discussion is all about. Now, I'm going to walk through each of the 3 buildings and what I call a capital needs assessment of those buildings. So the starting point here is to present you with a baseline. So here are the assets that we have today, and there's a certain capital spend just maintaining these assets and properties on a like-for-like scenario, right? Covering the essential investment. And then I'll add to that, if you maintain these 3 properties, here are the additional elements of investment that you would need to do. So those 3 perspectives collectively give you a benchmark budget or scenario against an amalgamation budget. And you'll see these are 2 very different budgets. And in the event of capital constraints and timing and disruption issues, you'll have to revisit this a few times. Is an amalgamation scenario really the best? We're recommending that it definitely is. However, there are, a number of considerations here in terms of disruption, relocation of fire services, different things. So these 3 individual asset reviews set up that discussion, okay? So I'll jump into this. I'll just page forward one at a time. So the first one I'm going to start with is Waterford Fire Station. A lot of discussion there. And again, I'll pause at each property for comments and questions. Now, basically, the 2 perspectives here. One is to look at the existing capital needs, and one is to look at functional deficiencies, right? So now the 2018 BCA, these are the results that it gave. So this is sort of the backgrounder. We have a building, I'm sure you're all aware of these assets, but we have a building that is over 100 years old that was repurposed into a fire station in 1950. So it's been in operation 70 years, albeit as a volunteer, part-time facility, but it's been in operation for some time. On the left of the photo there, you see a bay extension that was done in 1983. So today we have a gross footprint of 6,500 square feet. As a reference point, a new 3-bay station today would be a comparable size, slightly larger, but a comparable size. But the property would be about twice the footprint. So the property is not viable going forward for growth of services for some reasons I'll come back to, but it's inadequate from that perspective. The capital needs that were identified were $850,000. A number of issues there, but the needs are significant is the bottom line. The first and the condition index, which is just a percentage of capital to building value or property value, is 45%, which is very, very elevated. Normally, you would want an FCI to be under 10%, and in terms of a long-term sort of position to budget from. So there's significant needs here. The first one, I'm going to defer. I'm aware MTE is here with us, and they're going to speak to their structural report. But the driving concern for this property is immediate attention on the structural side. I'll just reference now a baseline budget. When I did the BCAs in 2018, I did have a structural civil engineer with me who's a senior person, and he set that down as a high-level background budget from which to consider remediation. Thankfully, I repeated some comments a few months back, and to Amanda's credit, she mobilized MTE pretty quickly, and we have a report to talk about tonight. So that's really good because it will give more clarity on this issue. So I won't go beyond that right now until MT is on board. Now, capital priorities for the property in the event that you do not mobilize elsewhere and you're able to do remediation, partition the building, keep the volunteer services in use. In the event that you feel that it might be 2 to 3, if not 4 years to construct new buildings and proceed with your rationalization vision, then you have some short-term investments that are recommended. These are, although they're referred to as life cycle renewals, there are some very old electrical panels, fire risk there. There are humidity issues in the basement, so there's a packaged dehumidification system that could be installed. All in all, in the order of 50,000, just to keep this in operation. But this is a short-term focus. This is not a long-term sort of solution. Okay, but whereas as remediation occurs, can fire services remain there, or do they have to relocate? This is a point to pick up on. If they stay there for a few years until there's a permanent solution, some budget items are recommended. Okay, so that's just immediate needs. Now for each of the 3 properties, we have excuse me. We have broker's opinion of value, or BOV reports available. These are very useful in giving supplementary budget line items. Now, our CBRE's brokerage out of London put these together. This is basically a comparables analysis. That's how you would look at this. Now, I just extracted 2 pages here, building comparables and land comparables. Okay, so first in building comparables, obviously with small town and older buildings, you're going to look in southwestern Ontario across the board. And what you're doing is coming up with a sort of a market value for the property. There's an assumption that remediation occurs, so the building, it has a long-term stabilization profile to it. This isn't an open-ended risk. It probably wouldn't be marketable if that wasn't done. So you've remediated the building, and an as-is sale, would consider these types of market values. In the event, so these are the comparables, and a square foot cost in the order of $42 down here per square foot of land is the bottom line. You can see there's a range here, but that's a limited range, and that's a useful average value, which gives you a property value in the order of $279,000 as is. This is after, again, your remediation spend. So, you're recovering much of that capital, perhaps not all of it, but that's a significant caveat. In the event that the remediation was not possible or was not desired to mobilize capital for that specific use, then you could look at demolition and land value, and there are land comparables here. An average of $10 a square foot here, I'm going to be referencing at the end of the day, which is a community land value that we would come back on for budgeting. There's a significant range here. The larger building has property that goes down to $2 a square foot. So this is a nice conservative average looking across a number of communities, but clearly this budget is high level reference budget. You may come up with something that is less than this. There's going to be a number of options and a number of budget points, and that's going to be a key concern. Okay, so the BOV report gives you some useful items to reference back when you're looking at the amalgamation scenario. Are we keeping these 3 properties or disposing of 1 or 2 of them? We've got the information here to talk about. Okay, so in summary for this property, in the near term, and I believe NMT will speak to this, but this spend needs to happen in the near term, meaning in the next year. For now, our budget reference of 350,000 carries. To the extent that MT, I would ask to update that, but that was the starting point in 2018. I believe it's still a reasonable number, but we'll get their input. two alternative scenarios here: upgrade and reuse, which I emphasize is a short-term solution, less than 5 years. You have this spend, 394,000. Perhaps the fire operations people have some functional requirements on top of that, but you're globally in the order of 400,000. And then you would still need to decamp and set up elsewhere. This property is not a long-term solution because of the limited land footprint. And the growth of services and vehicles are such that you would need a drive-through facility elsewhere, whether it's a new property or combined on an existing property, at Nauvoo Road or elsewhere. Okay, the property disposal scenario, the remediation budget would be in the near term. The land value would be after the fact. So this would not be coincident, but down the road after disposal, you'd have a net financial position where there's still a net cost. Today, we would anticipate a net outflow of 115,000. So that's the two directions. The key takeaway here are two. One is structural remediation, yes. Long-term stabilization of that wall is very important, especially with local weather effects and volatile weather these days that's occurring. The second is ultimately the long-term solution is going elsewhere. Look at property disposal, whether it's an as-is disposal for community considerations and use, hopefully a buyer or leasing options, or else ultimately land value. So that's kind of the overview of where this property is at. This is a good moment to pause for comments or questions before I move to the second one.
Do we have any questions for Rick right now at this point?
A lot to consider, I know, and MTE is going to be next up. So, I mean, we'll be able to revisit this property.
I was just going to say, Rick, this building was not converted to a fire hall until 1973. It wasn't 1950.
Okay.
In 1950, it was still a drill hall.
Okay. This is new information. That's the feedback that I got. So I didn't research community records. So that's you. So about 1973. So still in the order of 50 years it's been in use.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
There was a slipper factory in there, and I'm pretty sure it was a drill hall until the late 60s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the slipper factory moved in for 4 or 5 years.
Well, I doubt they're returning, so you're going to have to look at possible uses going forward. The issue with alternate uses, whether it's through the marketplace, a third party, or through the community, is leasehold revenue. Leasing revenue to the municipality is going to be limited because the building, even if it's sold, isn't going to be retrofitted into offices, nor would you allow that. And so it's going to be kind of a special purpose building, community markets or special functions and that sort of thing. So the upside on the leasing side is, will it recover the investment in it? That's a really difficult question because it's limited use, although it's an important hub sort of building, a heritage asset to the community. So that's a tough discussion because it gets into intangible value versus monetary value, right, in cash flow.
That's one thing that needs to be considered, I think. I don't know what the sound is doing, is that it does have heritage value to our community. And I think there would be quite a few people upset to see that building leave our community.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And nowhere in these reports did I say demolition is an option. Like I understand that's the very last option if it collapsed in some terrible weather scenario or something. But of course, remediation, hopefully this budget is very conservative and it comes in under that. Some informal discussions suggest that, yes, that's conservative budget, but I don't want to step in front of the experts, MTE, to say too much more. I think it's a good number though to start with.
How much land would we need to make it viable there? If we had the post office that we've looked at before as a community on the corner, would that be enough?
Sorry, I'm not sure if that question was to me.
I believe it was.
Yeah.
I think it's also the configuration of the land. It sounded to me like you needed land on both sides of the building so the trucks could be brought around in kind of like a drive-through scenario where they come
Yeah,
in one door or out the other.
In the report, I do detail what a new station would look like and configuration and cost. And basically in Southwestern Ontario, I looked at a half a dozen examples of similar sized communities and a 3-bay configuration. And the cost was in the order of 2.4 million. But the building was fairly comparable to what you've got, slightly larger, but in the maybe 10% larger, not that much. But the land footprint really stood out. This is in the order of 18,000, I believe, and the typical new building, because of the drive-through largely and outdoor training requirements, was about 34,000 square feet, so close to double. So that's the driver in the value. The 2.4 million there's a good chunk of land value in there.
Would the 400,000? Is anybody else hearing that echo? Is it better now? Okay. Would the $400,000 remediation make the building sound and safe for the interim, that until perhaps the next council could get to the point where they decided if they wanted to do amalgamation? Or
well, we're getting into Angelo's discussion with MTE. I'll just say that the discussion was around long-term stabilization, which means permanent stabilization. So that spend would position the building for long-term use in whatever capacity.
And that has to be done this year. Is that correct?
Yes, that's basically a situation that is creeping along every year and worsening. And in 2018, it was identified, and it's creeping worse from there. So yeah. To keep the building, it's really not marketable without any due diligence would pick up in this issue, and it wouldn't be sellable or usable without a permanent fix. So for any scenario going forward, I suggest that's where it starts: is do that remediation, and avoid the discussion at the community level of demolition.
Well, I know council has high priority in safety especially for our volunteer firefighters. So we want to make sure that it is sound and safe for as long as they will be using it.
For sure. So the reuse scenario here includes that, although it's not a long-term solution. It gives you time really to look at an amalgamation scenario where it might take a few years to construct some new buildings at a different location. And those new buildings include provisions for fire services, whether it's a standalone building or some additional bays onto a public works building is a moot point. It just buys time to get you there to demobilize from here directly into something, a new facility. So. Okay.
Any questions? Or can we go forward to the next section? All right, Rick, it looks like you're good.
That's good. Still lots to cover. So, okay, I'm going to jump to the Nauvoo Road property. This is the current Public Works hub. Let's see if I can quickly throw it up. Well, there's a few photos in here. So the 2018 snapshot showed what it was all about. So 1982 construction, so we're about 40 years old. Roughly 10,000 square feet between two buildings. This building here, there's a small office extension, there's 6 bays, and to the right, just outside of the picture, is a salt storage building. So that's where we're at today. The 2018 snapshot valued the buildings and put about a $355,000 20% spend to maintain. That's a little bit misleading, I have to say, because the building's in fairly good shape and it has been receiving some capital, new garage doors and some things like that. The $355,000, almost half of that are more essential site or property upgrades, which are not new buildings, but any BCA looks at property assets as well, right? So entrance fencing and a control gate and with security access, some light standards, things like this are considered part of the capital spend, although it's not technically a percentage of the building value. I would look at it on a property level. So that was the snapshot that we're building from, and it's largely unchanged when I walked through a few months back. The capital needs, the priorities are comparable to what they were a few years ago. 3 of the 6 bays are you'd want to convert them into permanent use. We have newer doors. I think this photo does show newer doors, but you'd still want to convert these 3 bays into permanent use, which means heating and electrical sub panels. Get these radiant tube heaters are just gas-fired heaters in the ceiling. Normally, with other municipalities, I've seen budgets like this where you do include some functional needs, whether it's just refurbishing these bays or adding on new bays. Capital budget is the time to hit some functional needs that are very difficult to do through maintenance budgets. So I'm including this, as an optional spend. The vehicle lift is important. A gantry crane is like a floor-mounted inverted V type crane where you can move things back and forth, like an engine or whatever. These are important spends that are otherwise difficult to approve, and I recommend where you spend capital include essential building elements like this, even though it's considered equipment. Okay, so that's why I'm mentioning it. It's up to you. If you take it out, you take it out. That's fine. But site improvements, that's the other issue in this budget. You can see combined in the order of 150,000. There's no security at this site. It's on it's high visibility on a highway. So entrance gate, access control, lighting standards again. The diesel spill containment, there should be a continuous concrete dike around there for containment. Should there be a tank break or an accident or something. You can also see in this photo here, the entrance apron, there's asphalt upgrades required and a lot of wear and tear. So that would be looked at. Now, beyond capital priorities, this is sort of a key slide. We're looking at site improvements here now. So the question becomes, if the amalgamation scenario is so capital intensive all at one point in time where you don't feel that you can take that plunge and fund that vision, as nice as it is, you want to maintain this as the hub property. The other garage property in Confederation Line is very land constrained, and not to mention neighbors and noise and dust and traffic issues. That is not a hub facility. It's debatable if it should be retained even and used, but it could be. Okay, so this is your hub location. These are the major elements. Now, the existing salt building in this first photo, you could either put a new 2-bay structure or use this foundation, double its size, and then it's simple wood frame construction. You could rebuild this with the trusses being elevated higher to match a new bay, right? Whether it's new or just doubled in footprint, that's a recommended spend. I'm showing only the new here, a concrete foundation with wood frame above it. You could augment that budget and raise this because it has been damaged and contacted a number of times. And so, that's a consideration. Depending on how tight capital is, you would want to do that normally. Higher clearance, right, as I'm saying here. Second one, this is the key building, and I'll show a property layout that I included. This is the key building for the operational hub for the long term. Very important investment. It's about 2/3 of the total spend for this as a hub property, 673,000. It would be either, as you see here, an open truss steel frame type building, concrete slab on grade. It would have the closed walls. I just like the photo, but it would be closed in structure, right? Now, this would deal with staff vehicles, fleet vehicles. You could accommodate trades bays, which I definitely recommend. A number of other municipalities do this. Speak with Ken Brown in Leamington if you want to get some perspective on this. I did some work for him. Very functional and useful to have trades bays. So a small facility for welding and or carpentry and or painting. You have a much more cost-effective approach to realize those trades as your needs grow and evolve. And it's highly useful to be able to call on your own internal resources to do these things. The other element would be an extension on the end of this building. You'd have a concrete CMU wall and a vehicle drive-through wash bay on the end of it. And that's definitely a need. There's no other facility available right now. It's manual washing, with water building up in the middle of the property because there's nowhere else to wash, and it's not a good scenario. So definitely you'd want, excuse me, the wash facility as well. So I'm calling it a new mixed-use storage building. It's really multi-purpose building. Excuse me. An additional element, this is called a Quonset building. It's basically a hoop frame type of building. It comes in any width and depth that you want. They're fairly common and highly cost effective. This is like I'm estimating at 64,000. It's a high value spend because it has multiple uses, and it eliminates the possibility of overbuilding this main building for every little functional need and everything being placed inside the building and congestion. This is a high value way of having a more flexible public works operation. This is for like equipment and add-ons to vehicles and materials and miscellaneous things that you just need some space indoors to lay down, but you don't want to congest your main fleet building here that has a lot more traffic and more functional use. This is just more of a day-to-day lay down sort of location. With or without a heater, it's a high value proposition. And the other one, the last one, again, it's high value spend because it's cost effective. Nothing more than on-grade concrete retaining walls so that you compress all of your materials handling on site in one location, side by side. And I'm talking about compartments that are maybe 2 meters high with concrete dividers. So a lot of space efficiency is gained, particularly on a new property. You don't want to be having more drive around space than you have to have on site. And so it's an important element, but on this property as a hub property as well, very important. So these are the 4 elements over and above. I mentioned this capital budget to fix what's there. This is your supplementary budget. And this is the corresponding layout. Now Amanda does have another consultant's vision of the layout here, but the key takeaway is, these are component budgets. They're like building blocks. Whether you reorient buildings on this site, if on this site or on a new land footprint, if you've got level graded property to build on, the unit costs are comparable. So you could reconfigure this property without substantially altering the budget here or in a different location, assuming the land is presented to the project. So this one key thing I'd point out here, again, I'm showing an expanded salt facility. Another configuration that could be high value, because in speaking with Andrew and looking at the other scenario, you looked at possibly 3 more bays on this maintenance building. If you wanted that, you could go into an L-shaped extension where you add bays on the end of this building and then come into an L shape for storage and trades and wash through. And basically that means you'd relocate the salt facility. That would probably come down here. That would flip to this corner, and this would turn into an L-shaped facility. That's also a viable scenario. But again, the budget is the global budget for approval and to start site development and design development issues. It's comparable budget, and you can still move forward. I wouldn't want you to think, well, you have to, start over with a new budget. No, this budget would apply. So that's very important. There are land value as is sort of valuation metrics there in the event that you want to dispose of this property. In this case, you would not demolish. The buildings are fine, and you would sell on an as-is basis or lease as is. But the market value is here. If you do look at disposal, that's an offset to an amalgamation budget, right? You might need an offset, and this would be one. So these are all the building comparables. $45 a square foot. At a quick glance, I believe that's on a property basis, not on a building basis. So the market value is in the order of $500,000. That'll be an important element to come back to. If you look at amalgamation, you certainly would want to capture this market value as an offset. Okay, so here's the summary. If you look to this site for as the public works hub solution, here's where you would end up. The first two items are the capital needs. The additional 4 I just mentioned are additional elements on this property. So 1.1 million to turn this into the hub. This is without consideration of fire services. If you want to adapt this property in a way to add a few bays and have parking and fire service capacity, that would be over and above this budget. Right, the 2.4 million that I mentioned is a new standalone building. It would be less than that if you're adding bays because you're adding on to an existing structure. But this is the conversion option at a minimum is this scenario. And again, it's a long-term solution. The first two items are today what's required, but you want to look 20 years at least in the context of community growth and growing needs and a growing fleet. And this is where you would land. So I'll pause it there. I probably provoked a lot of questions, and so I'll hear from anyone now. And then I'll talk about the garage next. Is Andrew on this call? I didn't notice. I think he is, yeah.
Yes, he is. Councillor Morris, do you have a question?
Would it be possible, since the office is going to be in Watford, to tear the office off and add a couple bays up front?
It's physically feasible and possible. I wouldn't recommend it because the building is in good shape and it's fully renovated inside. So it would be could be viewed as, albeit small, but it could be viewed as leasable space with or without any bays attached to it. Okay. So and you have a very deep land footprint here. So I would definitely go with bay extensions. I would go deeper into the property and not give this up when it's in good shape. It's actually in quite good shape.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Westgate?
This is the building that I don't want to amalgamate as far as I'm concerned. I think it's in the ideal location. It's in the center of the township. We've got a lot of what we need there. We do need to build a new salt shed. I think it should be on the south side. And we do need a couple more bays and fix up the ones that are there so that they are heated. And I know there's quite a bit of work to do here. With the open bay fleet storage, I'm not so sure we need that to start with, but that's not a good spot for it. We always pile our gravel there. We keep lots of maintenance gravel, quite a pile on site usually, especially in the spring when we need to get at it quick when the roads break down. So if we did have something like that open bay fleet storage, it would have to be moved, maybe facing the other way or moved back. But we do need, at least I believe we need, maybe Andrew can back me on this or oppose me, a fairly big spot to store our gravel. The office, I think, can be used. Maybe we can rent part of it out, but I think we need an office and a meeting room out there. A lunchroom for the guys that really haven't had a proper lunchroom for a while, and the washrooms there. But yeah, I believe this is still the best place for our town shed.
And this is why, if I can add, I was talking about a potential L-shaped extension, because that would open up and north is up in this photo, by the way. So the south or bottom part of the photo, along there, you could have much expanded capacity for materials handling and gravel and separate it from the building activity on the north. So I would agree with you, a new salt building would be in the lower right of this photo. And you still along the south side could easily set up a larger vision towards the bulk storage than I'm showing there, but these concrete retaining walls are the way to go because it compresses. You can have 2 to 3 meter high retaining walls and put a lot of material in there, as opposed to now you have to dump it in open land and it takes up a very broad footprint.
But we have maybe a 10 or 15 meter high pile of gravel.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know how many tons do we usually store there, Andrew?
2,000 tons of gravel.
well, with my suggestion is, with a 20-year vision and a ramp up of demand on services, I don't think that should be the driver. I think you might want to, if you look at an amalgamated property, then this property is perfect as a holding point for materials. Otherwise, if you're investing heavily in this property, you don't want to have a lot of congestion because of gravel buildup. You might look at an alternate location or just building a large concrete retaining structure to at least have it off to the side as much as possible. Larger than what I'm showing.
Yeah, we still have quite a bit more room back to the east.
Agreed. There is an extension of the property to the right that is partially treed and partially undulating that could be leveled and graveled off and used for gravel storage. That's another good point. So the additional land is there beyond what we're looking at.
I think we do need maybe a few smaller storage areas for stone, for cold mix, and for stuff like that, that would, like these other bulk storage areas would sure help us for something like that.
Yeah. So the answer might be both, right? If you use this property, the bulk storage would be displaced to the right, the rear of the property. The functional, the bunch of smaller material, or whether it's organic waste or I don't know, sand or other material, other granulars and materials. Some of the secondary storage needs can be just up front, so you're in and out. You can grab them efficiently. You're not disrupting other flows. So it's a good vision, and probably that L-shaped configuration helps it. It probably is a good use of the land across the north end of the property, because the salt building certainly would be flexible how it's sized and where it's located.
Any other questions or comments?
Okay, I'll keep things moving along then, because we don't want to run out of time. Okay, so here we are, the Public Works Garage. So this is the property in Confederation. A single building on the property. Okay, well, just to start, so it's about 2,700 square feet. Roughly, what would that put it at? About 50, maybe 55 years old. This is a wood frame building, slab on grade, just a steel shell and metal roofing. It's a basic function, and that's all it is. And it's been used that way properly, but now it's aging out. It needs some attention, if not expansion, if it's going to be reused. To the extent that you invest in this property, you'd be displacing investment from the other property, because you don't obviously use storage. Basic storage and vehicle servicing could be done here if it's refreshed. So that 1.1 million at the other property would be looked at in combination with this property versus an amalgamation scenario, right? So 139,000 and 29% is where it was assessed, and that's pretty comparable to what we have today. It has a new garage door, but I mean it's pretty much the same thing. Now, in terms of capital priorities, really a lot of the spend is not so much urgent as life cycle driven, but it's beyond life cycle, so it needs to be done. 169,000 to effectively refresh on a like for like basis. General refurbishment You would add emissions detection because that's a normal code requirement these days. Recondition the slab on grade, redo the siding and roofing. So that and site improvements similar to the chain link, sliding gate, control access. I would recommend this. You need to have some degree of security on sites, especially if you have outdoor parking and lay down of vehicles and components, and lighting standards. So in the order of 200,000, the as-is refresh. Now, key considerations for this property. I'm adding in the overall budget a $12,000 line item where you could drop a prefabbed concrete or masonry building on site for environmental, hazardous materials. That gets you around this because any construction that occurs, if MOL shows up, this is going to, or MOE, this is not going to be viewed favorably. Obviously, we want to clean it up. The way to do that is a prefab building off in the corner. It's a steel lockable door, self-ventilates. It just takes the issue out of this type of thing having to happen. So that's one. The other issue in this property is right here on the front side. What I'm told, I didn't review municipal records, but I'm told when this was taken over in 1970-ish, it was formerly a gas station. So any decision to sell this property rather than refurbish, you're going to have to look at an ESA review, a comprehensive environmental review, because you likely have underground fuel tanks here that were abandoned. I hope that those gas tanks were pumped and filled with sand because that's how you normally abandon them, but there's no predicting what you're going to find 50 years later. But the market value of the property and the environmental remediation cost has to be defined before you can make that decision. Otherwise, you're refurbishing what you've got and using it. You don't really need this and a hub, a hub facility with large investment, but that might be a significant budget risk. It's also unfortunate that it's across the street from a community hub and a large parking lot, and the alternative value and use of this property would be significant and would be looked at favorably if it were remediated. So, a big asterisk to this property. So these are the capital priorities in the order of 200,000, but the capital improvements, well, what would you do? You would not repurpose this property. You've got surrounding residences, so noise and dust issues, not to mention traffic issues, make it a sensitive location and traffic across the street. So it has a degree of sensitivity to how it's used, but a simple investment in an expanded wood frame structure, similar to what's there as part of the refurbishment vision, that gives you storage and basic maintenance here for at a very cost-effective price point without increasing truck traffic or potentially having a lot of blowback from neighbors. I don't believe. It's a reasonable proposition. You have enough land here for the traffic to come and go. What you wouldn't do is add additional functional uses or additional buildings on this property. It's too small, but it's also in a sensitive location. If it weren't for the environmental issue with the buried tanks, I would say you probably want to dispose of this and use the funds elsewhere. But there may not be much revenue from that. The environmental liability is something that really has to be looked at. Okay, so pardon me, I'm getting a frog in my throat. So a comparable wood structure, to double the footprint, comes in this range. Keep in mind what's important here is to displace away from the investment at the hub building Nauvoo Road. This is cost effective because it's simple wood frame construction. The structural steel or prefab, pre-engineered steel structure, the square foot costs are greater than here. And for the simple storage function, this is viable too. Per square foot, it's cheaper. Okay, if you want to keep this property, that's cost effective, but you just aren't going to functionally do more than what you do now. It's just not viable, not recommended. So two scenarios there in terms of how to rationalize, and that's an alternative to the amalgamation scenario. So again, we have land and property values here. There are a number of comparables, but they produce this kind of summary. Market value in the order of 175,000. I don't want you to be misled by this. There should have been a minor correction here. This is for both the Nauvoo Road and this property. This address is shown. The comparables analysis really applies to both properties because similar zoning, similar light industrial use. So both addresses should be shown here in this report and in the other report. So land value would reference both properties. The as-is value is what would change, right? So just to clarify that. So I mean, we come back to this more as you look at budgets. So here's your summary long-term optimization. If you say this environmental risk or do an ESA2 and clarify the environmental scope and cost. But if you don't want to address that budget, then maintaining the property is the answer. Here's the capital requirement, $500,000 with expanded storage and basic maintenance capability. That gives you a nice offset to investment in the other property. So that's a snapshot of it. Comments on this property before we get into the general discussion?
Councillor Morris?
Yeah, Amanda, how big is the workshop we're going to be adding to the arena? Would it not take a lot of the load off of this property?
Unfortunately, Councillor Morris, I'm not familiar with the square footage of the addition planned to the arena at this time, so my apologies. Certainly, that addition will take some of the storage needs away from this location, but I'll leave it to Andrew to correct me. But I believe this facility is primarily used for storage for public works. So Parks and Rec do have some interior storage, but it's limited to lawnmowers and related equipment more of that size. They do access the facility also for some maintenance work, which they will be able to transfer to the new location at the Watford Arena. But the interior storage is used for public works and public works equipment. The only thing the Watford Arena storage will offset is lawn maintenance equipment, and the gator actually, I think, might be stored there too. But Andrew, can you clarify if that's correct or any errors I made?
You've got it. Essentially, once public works equipment is in there, the parks and rec equipment is kind of sandwiched in to fill in the gaps of any kind of open space. That equipment is kind of sandwiched in there, so it will relieve some pressure, no doubt, out of there. But it's already, yeah, it's at its limit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Weston.
Andrew, do we still have storage in there for water supplies for pipes and fittings and stuff?
The storage is, oh, sorry.
And does the Clean Water Association, they still use that office and stuff, do they not?
That's correct. Yeah, but they don't store any of the material in the building. It's stored just west of the building.
Okay.
In the containers that are there. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions on this section? Or we can move on to questions of the overall. Councillor Westgate.
The one thing he talked about, Rick talked about gas tanks. I'm not sure it was used as a repair station, but I do not remember them having gas there. Now, I may be wrong. They may have had gas there for a while, but I do not believe it was a gas station.
That'd be very, I was told gas station, but the person wasn't sure. So that clarification would be important, because then property disposition to augment your budget at another location can happen, right? So
Yes.
it gives you more flexibility to decide going forward.
I wasn't very old when that was a gas station, but I remember going into it. And I say gas station, I don't think it was a gas station.
Could have been auto servicing, fair enough.
Auto service.
That's a key point, really, because if you want to consolidate as much as possible, whether it's new property or Nauvoo Road, this relieves the budget by a certain level, right? And it's a property location that has value in the community, has a certain level of visibility, and would gain interest from buyers.
Yeah, it's not a bad place to build a house if you could do it without a huge amount of remediation.
There's room for 4 houses, but I don't know whether you get more than 3 on it for access, because you'd never get access out to Nauvoo Road. But you could put two off to the street to the south, and maybe 1 out on to Centennial Drive there.
But it's also a high visibility location in terms of a commercial location. Someone looking to build a small commercial operation,
Yes.
not bad at all. It's on an intersection there that gets some traffic.
Yeah, it's a good location for that, for sure. Or even a like a larger home for several people, like an
Multi-residential.
apartment. Yeah, thank you.
That
Being
might
close
be
to the new facility, it wouldn't be bad, and it's not too far of a walk to the grocery store. It's not a bad option either.
including, and that includes co-op housing options, seniors options. So a number of things on the municipal side that, could be considered going forward. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. There's still more to cover. So now we've set down the baseline budget, and my report sort of gives you a table that puts it all together. It's in the order of about 2.4 million, everything that we've talked to at these 3 individual properties. And that is sort of the capital demands today and the essential, new buildings. Now, if you were to say, okay, we acknowledge, and I haven't seen the census results. I know there's a 2021 census, I believe. If I haven't seen it, but I understand you're on an established growth path now, so you have to really consider community growth in the long term, which means rationalization. This is the right time to look at rationalization from an ideal perspective, where you have a land footprint that suits fire services and public works as a hub, basically a side-by-side configuration on one property, on a newly acquired property. So this is what we're talking about with the facility amalgamation opportunity, and it's the driver for this review. Now, I just summarized, I put an executive level summary out as a report, like a 4-pager discussing the overall picture. I won't go into the details of it, but these are sort of the high level points that it makes. So key points here and the overall budget here. So just touch on this. We're all familiar with the drivers, the strategic requirements, community growth, functional use, capacity growth required. Consolidated land footprint captures efficiencies because you're starting with a design that considers traffic issues. It considers, fire services separate from public works needs, but would have dedicated site access to both. It could be a very timely and cost-effective option, although it's a higher budget level. It could be cost-effective in terms of having a scenario where you've got minimum disruption and associated costs. You could develop this property, start to build buildings one by one, and demobilize from the other 3 locations and sell those properties under a long-term plan of 3 years, perhaps 4 years. So it's a much more orderly approach with less disruption. Ultimately, you're getting the best operating costs, the best operating footprint in terms of efficiency. You would have lower energy costs. A number of benefits would come from this. Not the least of which is at a high level, you have a municipal AMP that gives you level of service parameters that you want to drive towards, and it talks about sustainability issues and demand growth issues. This is how you get there, right? This is the long-term solution that comes at a cost, but consider life cycle cost, not just capital cost up front, right? You would still have, the view would still have an integrated fire services facility on it. You do have to relocate. So, capture a land position that allows for that to happen. You would have a number of operating efficiencies. I'm listing some of the main ones here. Security is important. Improved dispatch logistics and control, right? Functional use, your capacity is designed to your needs, not as a kind of an add-on, a building add-on and an incremental approach. And so the benefits are, in terms of timeliness, the upfront capital is more, but the life cycle benefits would exceed the alternate scenario, I feel. So I'm emphasizing 3 to 5 year implementation window, depending on some, you have structural remediation, potentially some environmental issues to think about. And you have to plan among 4 locations, you have to plan the sequence of events and when to deploy capital for each step. But these parallel activities allow for an orderly sort of transition moving forward. It allows you to keep control of the budget on a year-by-year basis and make adjustments as they happen. And this always happens. So, I mean, it allows you to revisit annually the strategic vision and tweak the scenario as required. So this is the corresponding budget. Now, land acquisition is the big wild card here, as it always would be. I'm using the the $10.12 average from the BOV report. Now, I would note, this is a unit cost that's garnered from small communities across southwestern Ontario. So there's a range there. There's a dispersion. One transaction in Watford came in at $2 a square foot. So you can see the average is a conservative number, but depending on how tight a footprint you want within the municipal boundary or just outside of it versus some other options, you may approach the $10, you may not. You may compress that. So that's 20% of the total, and it's a very significant part of the decision. But I'm starting at a conservative position here, right? The new fire hall, this is a standalone building on a new property. That would come down if it were an extension of a building, as I showed at Nauvoo Road. If you had a pre-engineered steel building, you could add a bay, with a comparable design, a block wall in between the two. Just like I recall in Warwick, the community center is attached to the fire hall. Well, you have a block wall and efficient use of 2 very different functions under one roof. And so you can still think of it this way as well. It's an efficient use of space. So that 2.4 million would come down as well. Unless, your fire operations, they wanted something standalone and thought, potentially it might be full-time, et cetera. So the vision today is that you're going to remain as a voluntary service for the foreseeable future. The 20,000 population threshold is not going to happen in the near term. So, this is the ideal, but not necessarily what needs to be spent today to achieve a relocation. The other elements, these are from Nauvoo Road as a modular spend. This is the retaining wall. So the bulk storage idea, the same idea. Dry storage facility, which is the sand salt, a new 2-bay facility. The Quonset, which is the hoop frame building for flexible storage, definitely a recommended element. And the major hub building, okay, the steel frame building, I've transferred the cost and the size. If you don't include trades functions or as much storage capacity, let's say you for some reason you want to keep Confederation Road but still proceed with a new property, well, that downsizes this building. And again, this number comes down. So 3 of the large numbers that make up 80% of the budget, you can see they have some flexibility to the downside, depending on how you strategize going forward as you go into development phase. Okay, and asphalt parking, I'm allowing for a reasonable asphalt footprint and fencing and site security. So there's a spend there as well. So 5.8 million, and it's a conservative budget, but this compares to 2.4 million looking at the 3 properties individually. So it's about 60% less to deal with the 3 properties as is. You know, there are pros and we could talk at length of the pros and cons. Rationalization is a good thing. There's a lot more efficiencies here and lower operating and energy costs. You also have to deal with fire services in any event. So I wouldn't, you know, throw or discount this out of hand. There are some drivers that suggest this is the right long-term decision. And when you look in terms of life cycle costs, things do tend to even out quite a bit because of the inefficiencies of having multiple properties and other issues. So quite a significant range from 2.4 million to 5.8 million. But again, those are the major factors. So without using more of the time, why don't we throw it open to discussion?
There's a lot of information.
Can I just say to the group here, you know, Amanda has my contact information. If anyone wants clarification of one of these reports and a 15-minute phone call, like, don't hesitate to give me a shout. I can pull the report out at any time. When you read these reports, there's a lot of detail in there, and it's important to capture the big picture messaging and not get lost in the, I've put a lot of details in these, but feel free. We can't discuss all the details in one meeting here. I'm available. You know, that's just a given downstream of this. So just know that.
Councillor Westgate?
I was just wondering how our fire chief felt and Andrew felt about having the fire hall tied to our work area. I've never thought that was a good idea because there's usually vehicles parked around. You can't secure a fire station off with a fence because our first volunteer fireman that's there, he needs to get right in. He can't be stopped opening a gate. And you got to have a lot of parking around a fire hall where people can park and where you have access to it and it's controlled.
Yeah, I've got some issues with it, Jerry. Like you said, you can't have a a gated fire hall where people have to stop and open a gate to get in or get out.
Yep.
You'd have to have a standalone building, that's for sure. The one in work is quite different when you got a community hall attached to a fire hall. You're talking about public works vehicles attached to the fire hall. And the fumes and stuff from those trucks would not be a good idea. Right now, our fire hall is in a prime central location for response time. We have a very good response time. If we
Rick, where are most of your calls though, Rick?
In town.
Where do you go most of the time? 402.
Medical calls.
Yeah, or 402. Yeah.
Yeah. Most of ours is
prime location. I don't agree with that.
Most of ours are medical calls. If you go back to the master fire plan, you'll see that that was mentioned in there, that our response time was quite good.
Can I just jump in and have a quick comment on that? You're exactly right. It's a key consideration and it's a driving factor. However, you could, if you were to look at a new land position under this amalgamated scenario on the 402 side of town and effectively pick up a land position where you have side-by-side properties. If you want a separate building, you can fence them off and just make one land investment and build the various different buildings in an entirely partitioned way. It doesn't have to be an extension of an existing building. I totally agree that I'm saying that's an economical option because it's a voluntary, a part-time facility, but and it's a lot more capital intensive to build a new building when it's only volunteer. But whichever way you go, you could view a property as, particularly if it were a corner location with two different access points and a partition inside the property, you could almost view them as two separate properties being developed at the same time. It's a key point, though.
Yeah, right now, as far as the fire department goes, response times is the big thing.
Yep.
How fast you can get there. If you're going to move it out to the 402, you really don't need two fire halls, do you?
I don't think the intention would be to move it out to the 402. It would still be close to town, I would believe. I wouldn't want it like way outside of town for sure.
Here's the other question. Are you going to keep the old fire hall?
It's a very good question.
Because if you're going to fix it up anyway, why not continue to use it as a fire hall? Different if you're going to tear it down, but don't get me wrong, I'd love a new building. I just don't want one out in the country.
But let's keep in mind, in making a long-term investment decision, you've got a facility that's inadequate, and you're going to have community growth means growth in fire services, not just the rate of callouts, but the facilities required. And you've got a site that's too congested to be functional. You really don't have drive-through or any ability to modify that building. So you could reinvest to stay the course for a few more years, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to be functionally efficient. And as soon as that becomes a problem, you could have a scenario where you're just not able to manage in the way that you want to manage. And so I think it's inevitable that you need a new footprint in the coming years, with the community growth being established that it is.
If we had it close to Confed someplace out on the north side of town, but not out past the hardware store, someplace in there would be fine, would it not, Rick?
The closer to Watford, the better. Most of our calls are in Watford. You
don't go to Brook too often, do you?
No. The only time we go to 402 is to back up Warwick on 2-station response in the daytime. We don't go at night.
But see, one consideration there is that you can dispatch locally in Warwick. And when you're going there from Watford, I assume that's as a backup, like an additional capacity or additional call or something, but you have a local response, and you would want to have that in Watford for sure as well. So I agree, just looking on the north side of town, but still attached to town, is somewhere on that flank of the community would be your ideal scenario, where you could look at an amalgamation side by side sort of investment scenario.
I agree with that as well.
To me, that would be the go-to decision if you're going to acquire land.
Councillor Morris?
I agree with Jerry, though, on one thing. The Public Works building, I think, should stay where it is in central Warwick. I don't think it'll be happy or a good suggestion to move it closer to town. The fire hall, I see both points. I see Rick's point of the old building. I am afraid the old building, once we get turned out of the fire hall, I think it'll just turn into the Roach Hotel and just go downhill. I don't see any great use for industrial for it.
Sorry, can you clarify that, Councillor Morris, that you're afraid that if we
if we don't keep it as a fire hall, if we put some money into now to get us through until we can get a final plan, I don't see the building staying. I can't see somebody buying that for the figures that have been thrown out there today, and to turn it into an industrial building. I'm afraid it'll go like the Roach Hotel and just deteriorate, and we'll end up tearing it down.
Yeah, I would love to see it turn into a farmer's market or something similar to that. I would hate to see it torn down. It's been part of our community for so many years, and it's a beautiful building. It's not like it's,
I think it can be reutilized in another fashion, like Jackie said. Change of purpose, but I think reutilized for sure.
I'm wondering, I'm very wants versus needs. And I feel like there's the need that it has to be, at least in the interim, even if we're only going to use it for the next 2 to 3 years in planning, it has to have the initial remediation done this year. Is that correct?
Yes, and we're about to go to MTE, so we can pick up on that point in a moment. But yes, near-term remediation, long-term stabilization is a priority. It's been needed for a number of years, and it's time to make the decision. It really is.
Councillor Westgate.
We actually should, even if it's only for 2 or 3 years, do something about handicap washrooms and showers for the firemen when they come back in from certain areas. Even if it's only going to be a year or 2.
Well, the structural side of things is very important.
Gotta be done.
And that was 400,000. That was the base cost for this year. Is that correct, Rick?
350 was the 2018 estimate from our civil engineer.
So it's
subject to comments today from MT. And I have to say, it's a very difficult, very customized sort of project to do. And informal discussions with our structural said, yeah, you would think it's going to be a lot less than that. That sounds like a very high budget, but don't dismiss a couple of factors. One is it's very customized, difficult work, which means slow and labor intensive. Also, it's in a remote location, and it's on a very sensitive building where you have to maintain the look of the building. You're not just going to build up over top of the wall. You're going to keep the outside as it is. So, construction costs I've found in other projects are pretty aggressive right now. There's a backlog, and people are busy, and they're bidding aggressively. I think it's wise to look at that 350 as being realistic, even though in another location and another time, you might say the scope of work is less.
Okay.
You don't want major budget surprises to the upside, and so you have to be realistic about these risk factors.
Okay, I'd like to ask Rick and Yanni to stay on the call, and we'll move on to Angelo, because he looks like he's got some information that he would like to add to this discussion.
Perfect. Oh, I'll try to give the screen back.
All right, Angelo, we'll turn the meeting over to you, and you can give us some more information.
Well, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Good.
I presume everybody's had a bit of a chance to review our report that was in that went around to the councillors. So I won't go into it in detail. I'll just summarize what we had found. It is an old building. It's over 100 years old, but it was built, I'll say, robustly. It was used by, the volunteer military for training and things like that. So it's not something that was just sort of slapped together just to create an enclosed space. And it also has, quite nice, I would say, architectural features on the main north side, but also it's replicated on the south side as well. From what we saw, it has been renovated. I presume the bricks themselves were washed because they're quite new. Once a building gets up around 100 years, it starts to, with smoke and diesel fumes and stuff, it starts to get that sort of blackish tint to it. So it has been, well taken care of. I think a lot of the cracks in the mortar that were visible have been repaired, so that's stopped additional water from getting into the walls. So it's generally it's been well taken care of. There was the one-story addition that was put on the east side, which is basically another truck bay, and that has actually helped to stabilize the building motion, because if you saw the one of the sort of historical pictures in the report, the north side only had sort of one larger door in the center bay for I don't know, their horses and wagons to come in, or their artillery or whatever they were bringing in. When it became a fire hall, there was two, the center bay and the east bay of the original building. They were opened up to add in the two large overhead doors for the large trucks. So when that was done, it sort of compromised the structural stability of that face, but there were steel channels and things that were added as part of the overhead doors. So it's not like they just cut a big opening and put a door in there. There was thought that was put into it. And then when they added the east addition, it's also physically connected to the original building. And you'll see that in some of the pictures where the bricks are all tied together. It's not like you see a vertical joint where it was the original building and then the new building. Then at the south side of the building, there was that sort of community center type kitchen that's been added in the past. And I guess pre-COVID, it was used fairly often for, fish fries or, barbecues and things like that, where I presume the volunteer firefighters would cook and, the community would show up and have supper and just chat on a Friday night or whatever. So that is a newer construction, and it's in fairly good shape. We didn't do a lot of review of it because it's, it is new construction. It's one story, and it's not, wasn't really part of the mandate from Amanda's main concern. And Rick from CBRE was the construction or the condition of the original building. So going back to Rick's dollar values, the 350,000 that he had in there, we would agree with that for the long-term improvements or remediation to the building. The issue we found that was mainly, and it was sort of described in the report, it was at the two end walls, at the mainly at the south wall, but at the north as well, not as much, it wasn't as pronounced, is that that attic, what you would call the attic space of the building, the brick wall would only have been attached to the rafters, which are at the very top of the roof, and at the back, because there's a second story mezzanine, it would have been attached at the ceiling joists. So you have a fairly large wall that originally it was probably connected very well. They would have had nails between the rafters and the brick, or metal ties, or some combination. But with time, nails start to rust and things start to pull out. And the condition of the south wall is worse because it faces south. And so you get, in the early spring and late fall where sometimes you'll get wind-driven rain, say during the day, and then at night you get freezing temperatures. So you start to get deterioration in the wall, and that's called a freeze-thaw cycle, where your temperatures are sort of hovering just above and just below zero. And you'll see that in the pictures where the face of the brick is, in some cases, especially in the upper areas of the parapet, where it's above the roof, so it gets very little heat because it's exposed on both sides. So you'll see that the face of the brick is physically just spalling off. So it's, over time that'll just continue. Remediation to that, you've probably seen in apartment buildings in Sarnia or here in London, with the older apartment buildings that are, in the 70s and that sort of time range. Owners have typically put siding to cover up the top 2 stories, and it's basically to cover and to protect that same type of condition that you're seeing in this building. But I don't think anybody would like to just cover it up, considering the architectural look of it. So in our report, we had several recommendations. The main recommendations were considering sort of the long-term, keeping the building for the long term, either keeping it as the current fire hall, maybe for 5, 10, 15 years, and and then possibly having it as another community type usage. So in order to do that, we were suggesting that reinforcement be done for those upper areas of the mainly the south wall, because it's literally starting to lean out towards the south. And you'll see that in some of the pictures where there's physically gaps between the last rafter and the inside face of the brick wall. Now, it's not, that condition didn't just happen yesterday or last week or last month. It's something that's happened probably over the last 50 years, 60 years, and it's just a progressive thing. Unfortunately, from an engineering standpoint, there are no calculations that we can do and say, yeah, you're okay, you're good for another 10 years. Not, nothing will happen to it. It's a, basically we term it as it's an existing condition. However, we can't, provide any sort of guarantee and say, yeah, you'll be good for 10 years or you'll be good for another 25 years and then you have to worry about it later. So in terms of public safety and the usage as well, we're recommending basically to tie or to add more ties between the back wall and the north wall, because once you're going in to do the work, it makes sense to do both sides. Although the north wall isn't as bad because it doesn't see those freeze-thaw cycles in the spring and in the fall. Now, Amanda, when we were sort of discussing the preliminary reports, Amanda was, suggesting that, well, maybe the new fire hall would be completed in, say, 2 or 3 years in a fairly short time span. So the question was, do we have to do all of this recommended work, or is there, something of lesser, like a smaller budget? And the last recommendation that we added in the report basically addressed that. And that was, there was some very minimum work, but fairly needed. And so that we were saying basically should be done, in the next 6 months. And that is some sort of repair and stabilization work inside the attic space to support the there's 2 large timbers basically that one on each side of the building that support the 2x4 and 2x6 roof rafters. And those, at this point, those large timbers just rest in pockets in the wall. But since the wall is, moving out, those timbers are having less and less support at that end. And the danger is if, you get some, freak tornado that happens to not necessarily, pass by, where you get strong suction winds on that wall, it may be just enough to, physically pull the wall out far enough that those timbers aren't supported anymore. And then, so they would drop down, and then the rafters would go down with them. So then, all of a sudden you've got a sort of a partial collapse of the roof over that sort of mezzanine area at the back, which is used presumed by the volunteer firefighters for meetings and training and stuff like that. So the minimum work was basically to do that reinforcement and stabilization in the attic. So that would eliminate sort of the sudden possible partial collapse. But you still have the problem that the rest of the wall isn't well connected to the roof structure. So there is still the possibility that the wall itself or portions of the wall under severe winds could be literally pulled out, and so you'd have that south wall. It won't collapse into the building because it would push up against the rafters and the other things. So the only danger really is that the wall would collapse to the south, or parts of the wall. And then, of course, it would fall on top of that 1-story addition that was done at the back, and that sort of grass area that's at the back. So as part of the minimum amount of work, you would do the repair work in the attic, but we would also, in the report, we said you would have to close off that 1-story space so that it couldn't be used, and also that the back grassed area would physically be fenced off, so people generally wouldn't be able to get back there. And that's more as a fail-safe, because we can't, there's no guarantees. We can't say, you're not going to have a problem for the next 10 years or so. And if we seem to be getting more and more of these, we don't get the big tornadoes like they do in the Midwest, but every year we seem to get these little twisters that just sort of, randomly hit. And sometimes they're, they land out in the country, and it just, topples some outbuildings or stuff like that. And sometimes, you could be unlucky and it, hits a couple of buildings in town. So that's sort of a danger that's unpredictable, unfortunately. So that was our as a very minimum, if you were indeed only going to, keep it as a fire hall for say, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, to build a new one, then that would be sort of the bare minimum that we recommend be done. So in terms of cost for that, we would think that sort of, around 50,000 would cover that work. But it does mean that that whole back area is basically off limits. At this point, it doesn't matter because I think it's not used because of COVID and stuff, but presumably, things would start to open up either, this summer or next year. So, the community would want to, start to say, hey, we want to use that space back there. And so, there's a trade-off between spending a minimum amount of money and but having that whole south back area closed off, or going through and doing more of the remediation and stabilization work, which would put you sort of in that 350 and possibly 400,000. These days we just find that prices are just crazy, and a large part of it is getting materials and labor, and just the uncertainty with all the COVID stuff that's happening. Work just becomes unproductive. And even this week we've had examples. We've had some small projects at Victoria Hospital here in London, and the contractor that's working on it, he's having to reschedule. Some people that were working on that project, they had to stay in quarantine because their wife tested positive or their kids tested positive, and then all of a sudden, work stops on that project, and they have to, get people from another project. So a lot of the projects are suffering from that sort of scenario, and that gets translated into an expanded construction schedule and more money basically. So even that 350 to 400 may be a bit on the low side, depending on how things go in the near future. I know everybody's gotten their 2 shots, and a lot of people have gotten their booster shots, but it just seems to be still propagating through. So it's become a very big unknown in terms of construction schedules and things like that. So things just seem to get spread out further and further.
We can open it up to maybe some more questions here. I was personally wondering, so there's a big difference between 50,000 and 400,000. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around that. Trevor, what did you put in the budget?
We've gone with a higher number because we saw it as being a bridge for several years rather than short term.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking. I don't think that this is going to happen overnight with the new facility. And it sounds to me like we have to do certain remediations just to ensure that our fire volunteers are safe. And so what was the number?
Well, the 50,000 that I suggested, that like that repair work that we were saying, stabilization in the attic, that would be done as part of the long-term work as well. So it's not like you spend 50 and then you spend another 400. So, if you're saying, okay, and, the Chief Rick there was, he's thinking, well, we've got a good setup at Central. it sounds like you want to keep it for, 10 or 15 years or longer, so that, at that point, it would make sense to do the full remediation.
Yeah, we did 350 structural remediation for the budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you, Trevor. Ms. Gobles, did you want to add to that?
Thanks, Mayor Roberts. I only just wanted to add, thanks to Angelo for that report. I really, as he alluded to, we have had some correspondence about, me trying to get a sense too of what's the absolute bare minimum and what kind of timeline does that provide us with the fire station. And I think that's why Angelo and his team went back and came up with this attic restabilization option as a much shorter term fix. And the intent was that if council was in a position to, my intent in asking for that anyway, was that if council was in a position to make a decision for a replacement and had the appetite to do so in, on a tight window at a new location, then I wanted you guys just to have that figure in your head while you were considering that. But as Trevor stated, we did budget 350 based on the total rehab cost or stabilization cost recommended by both consultants for 2022. I just, again, wanted you guys to have all the information that we could glean from our experts here.
And, Councillor White and then Councillor Westgate.
I do think a full remediation would be good. I agree with Wayne and other councillors that I don't want to see that building leave the community. I don't know that it'll remain a fire station long term, but I think there are lots of other potential uses for that building, and it is a beautiful architectural feature in the town. So I'm my feeling is that you work towards a full remediation, but it may not be it may be part of a bigger plan for the community in the future.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Westgate?
I guess I was going to say much the same as what Todd just said. I think we need to fix it and fix it right.
Well, and as we know, it is hard to find contractors right now. So I think the sooner we get to looking at RFPs for that, the better. The other question I had is in terms of the budget is we had put off the salt shed. And I think that, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is a priority. The salt shed and the wash bay are both high priorities. Is that added into this year's budget, Trevor, or no?
No, I haven't added them into this year's budget. Waiting for direction of this meeting, and I figured it'd take further deliberation. I can always make changes, but they're not there right now.
Okay, because that's a big part of this as well. I don't see, and correct me if I'm wrong, council, but I don't see a huge appetite to make a big decision on amalgamating in this term. I'm looking at my council and they're all like, yeah, no. So I think we do need to do the things that have to be done, those needs things. Councillor White, do you want to add?
I think we should build for the future, which I do believe does mean amalgamation, working towards it. I think we should be strategic in where we spend our funds. Like strategic meaning, I do believe in the fire hall that it should be kept. So I think that's a good project to spend funds on. I question whether we should go too far with a wash bay or a salt shed. Like I think we do what we need to do there, but I think those projects are things that we should consider as an amalgamation in the future. And I don't want to throw good money after bad either. So. and I'd like to hear what Andrew feels, because, you know, it's his guys that are using it, so where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, the current salt shed, it's certainly not adequate, and of course, it does require repairs. And a wash bay, I think, would be certainly beneficial for the longevity of the equipment. But I agree, building a salt shed kind of solidifies what you're doing going forward. If you're going to build one and you put it on that property, that kind of limits what you can do for amalgamation purposes. So I guess council will have to decide.
As far as the wash bay is concerned, is it possible to maybe do a private public partnership where we utilize the old Budmar space that's just around the corner on Egremont Road? They've just built a good wash bay there. Or maybe somebody else knows more about what's happening with that space. Councillor Westgate?
I believe you want the wash bay on site. I believe when they come in at 4 in the morning or they come in at 4 in the afternoon, they don't want to go someplace else and wash the truck off. It should go in right into the storage spot. It shouldn't have to be on the highway to get back to our shed.
Yeah, I was just thinking temporarily.
And I'm still think where our public works shed is now is the best place for it. The one in town, something has to be done with it. We're probably gonna have to do something with the fire hall. But that out there, it's most central. Most of our trucks are heading north from there.
Councillor Mitchell, you look like you have something on your mind here.
No, I really align with Jerry's sentiments there. Having the roads department out there standalone makes sense. I get we have to do something with that. Call it an eyesore in town, across from our new Parks and Rec facility. We have to do something there, and yeah, I just agree with what Jerry was saying.
So if we were to do, and maybe Rick, you can answer this, if we were to do kind of a short term, when I say short term, I mean about 5 years, where we could make sure that the fire hall is safe and sound, that the Parks and Rec gets their needs met, or sorry, Public Works gets their needs met out at the current site, and fix up just the look of what's happening on Confederation Line. What was the total cost for that? It was
the rationalization at the Nauvoo Road site was 1.1 million, in that range, but that included the new buildings, right? So you'd work backwards from there depending on what activities you would do. But I would point out at the same time, if you're, and I agree, of course, protecting a heritage building, it's going to be a more efficient, whatever the spend comes in at the fire station is going to be more efficient in one step than two. If they're only a few years apart and you're going to do it anyways, it's a tricky project. You probably would want to just bite the bullet and do it, and with urgency, because there's health and safety issues and occupancy issues. But depending on the elements that you wanted, I know the global budget at Nauvoo Road is 1.1 million. I'm not sure if you wanted other specific line items.
Well, I think sorry, I don't know why that keeps doing it. At the current Public Works site, I think the salt shed and the wash bay are the two main priorities, wouldn't you say, Andrew? Like, when you're comparing wants versus needs?
As well as we also have storage constraints too. We have vehicles that are left outside currently because there's literally no room for them. So that's also a concern too.
Councillor Morris, do you have a comment?
I guess one thing that concerns me is the money. The fixing the fire hall right now, I agree with everybody else, get it done. But as far as like spending 4 to 6 million that I've heard, we've just spending $11.5 million on a new community complex. I think we got to pay some of this off before we start spending more money.
Plus the new office.
Well, yeah. Like we've spent a lot of money this term, and I think it needs to be, we need to pay some of it back before we start spending another $4 or $5 million on buildings.
Okay, I agree. I think it's a difficult spend, but again, I think the fire hall should be a priority this year in trying to get it up to standards, because we don't want to see that building collapse. Trevor?
That's what we came with in the budget. We came with what was going to be the short-term fix to make it essentially what we went to. And I actually quoted Rick from one of his emails earlier. It was for health and safety reasons primarily, which is why we went with the 350. I know it would be nice to have washrooms and all that, but accessible washrooms in a building that's end of life is very short, and probably not going to be hosting very many more events now that we're going to have a new facility to do that. That's going to be more inclusive. I don't think would be the wise spend of funds at this point in time.
Rick, can you see your pancake dinners and your fish fries being moved to the new facility once it's up and running?
That'll depend a lot on COVID. Like right now, we don't have them. So that kitchen makes no difference to us right now.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Is staff comfortable with the direction that we're hearing? And Councillor Westgate, you have another comment?
This is off subject altogether. Angelo, you're at 123 St. George Street.
Or address?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the building I remodeled back in the early or the late 70s. I redid that whole building. It was a foundry and a slaughterhouse, and I forget what it was when I went in there.
Yeah, it's been there.
Columns Insurance is where you are now?
Yeah, no, that's our office right now.
Yeah, I did that building 78, 79, or 88, 89, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's seen quite a few different uses. I know some people that worked there in the sort of mid to late 60s when it was, some type of foundry or something.
Yeah, there was a foundry and there'd been a slaughterhouse in part of it. And
yeah, it was mainly,
place.
Yeah, it's an industrial building. Basically, it's robust. It's got concrete slabs and thick brick walls as well.
Yeah, I redid that whole building.
It doesn't look as nice as the fire hall because it was an industrial building, so it didn't need all the fancy brickwork and stuff.
I have a question. The property that we own where the current public works is in town across from like on Centennial Ave and Federation Line, is it large enough that if you wanted to build a new fire hall and have storage there, is that property big enough?
I can comment on that. The property, I'm not going to throw out the exact square footage, but it's comparable to the existing fire station. So your first thought would be, well, no, then, I'm saying a new station typically requires about twice the footprint. However, on a strategic corner location, you could have drive-through access and in and out access from two sides of the property and use a compressed footprint. So I would say it may be feasible there. Whereas a normal starting with a blank piece of paper, you you would have a different configuration. That may be a good compromise, especially if there's no environmental remediation issues. Reuse of that property moves you ahead a couple of steps. So I would say a feasibility of that design is likely to succeed. And it's about as tight a footprint as you could look at, but it is larger than the other property. There's a little bit more land and a strategic corner location. So it's a good thing to revisit in the future, to think about.
And that would be a good location, would it not, Rick?
Oh, yeah.
Nice and close, and
It's on the north side of town.
well, and right beside the
It's
arena. And
it's close enough.
Direct access to 402 and still connected to the community. So
Yeah.
strategically, I think it's a positive as well.
yeah,
No, it's close enough.
so that's something to consider.
I thought when you guys were talking about building a new fire hall, you're talking about out in the industrial park.
No, I think
That's-
everybody has always
That's
thought
too,
it should be close to town.
that's too far to respond.
Yeah. Councillor Mitchell?
Is it too early to maybe make a direction to do an environmental assessment on that patch to see what is under there?
My suggestion would be start with your internal resources and just do a records check on the use and what information is available. You may eliminate that. You may verify that it was not a fire station. There's a chance you could even have original drawings on file that say this is what it is, and there was, so you may be able to eliminate a full-blown assessment as well.
Well, if I know anything about Councillor Westgate, he is usually bang on when it comes to that kind of thing. So, but I think it is certainly worth looking into and doing a historical search on that. But I would not be at all surprised if it was a service station instead of a gas station. Rick, did you have something else you wanted to add? Sorry, I thought I had seen your hand up. So I'm wondering, as far as staff is concerned, for direction for the budget, I'm getting a feeling that council's certainly wanting to make sure that the current fire hall is safe and sound. So we're looking at the $350,000 to $400,000 spent this year to make sure that that happens. I'm not trying to lead from the chair. I'm just trying to move the meeting forward a little bit.
I agree.
Okay. Amanda, did you want to add anything, or do you need a motion in regards to something like that?
So in this case, I don't believe so, because it is already a placeholder in the proposed 2022 budget that's been presented to council previously, based on my review, or with Trevor's obviously guidance of the changes proposed in the 2022 budget that are coming forth next week. This one is still a placeholder. So it would just come to that special meeting, and council can, at that time, either approve the budget as is, or of course make any additions or changes. So I don't believe that direction is needed, unless, Trevor, have I misspoke? Is that correct?
No, there is one thing, and I'm trying to open it. Give me 2 seconds. We also have a placeholder for land acquisition. And I'm not going to remove that before next Thursday, because if we're going to look at doing a phase 1 environmental on an existing building, that would give us the funds to do it, and it would be a nice direction at that point in time if that's the case.
I kind of like looking at the feasibility of using that corner in the future.
I wouldn't be opposed to having Rick Sellington and a team get together to put together what they want in a new hall and get some maybe a drawing done or something, a rough drawing, not an engineering full drawing, but what it would look like and what we could expect maybe.
At the Watford Garage location, Councillor Morris, or at a different location?
No, I think Jackie had a great suggestion. That corner lot there, I think that's a good suggestion.
So then
It would give us a alternative. We got to fix the fire hall, we know that, but would give us some time to look at what are the uses the old fire hall would use and how much a new one would actually cost without land.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, if that's council's as a whole direction, we're happy to pursue that. I will flag though that, exploring the repurposing of the Watford Garage site for a fire location, while still in an optimal location, does displace the function that site still, currently uses to support public works operations in Watford. And so an alternate solution that maybe hasn't been presented would need to be discussed. And based on our current land inventory, it would still include land acquisition because we do need a sub location for public works for equipment to be stored in and around Watford.
Across the street.
That's council's direction. I'm happy to, we'll do whatever you guys tell us to do.
Rick and then Angelo, please.
You talking to me? Or the other Rick?
No, sorry, Rick Sitlington.
Yeah. So I just got off the phone with Keith Milner, and he used to work at that gas station, and there was pumps there.
Okay.
Used to belong to Ken Westgate. So there was gas pumps there.
I knew Ken owned it, but I didn't think there was pumps there, but
Yeah.
like I said, that's a long time ago.
Angelo, you had Angelo and then Rick Takis.
Point to add, you were discussing the using the corner lot for the new fire hall. If people wanted an example, our central fire station that we designed here in London is actually that. It's on two main intersections. It has I think three large bays that allows for 2 trucks in each one, and it has it's quite large because it has the 911 call center and stuff. It's just a suggestion if people are interested in how that sort of corner arrangement works. It's that there's an existing building that's basically set up for that. You might only have 2 bays or possibly build it so that you could add a 3rd bay in the future. And definitely we've done a few other fire halls where it's only on the one street, but it does have the drive-through from the back. So you need more space for the big fire trucks just to physically get to the back and turn around and drive, or not turn around, but to sort of turn and come back in through the building. So it does take up a lot more space that way. So it's just a suggestion if people were interested. It's an existing building. It's been there, at least 25 years now. So it's, it's been in good use. So.
Thank you for that. Councillor Westgate.
I think before we decide anything else, we should think about this until the budget meeting at least, or until Monday night at the meeting, and then make some suggestions. We came here to talking about putting all 3 buildings together, and I guess we should have a look at that first and decide whether we want to do that or not, and then go ahead and spend money on location of a fire hall or whatever.
Agree with Jerry. Yeah.
Rick, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple of two quick comments with respect to the corner property, right, with the garage on Confederation Line, I think it is. First of all, it appears that we're going to be able to confirm that it had pumps on it. So I would prioritize in the immediate budget an ESA site review or environmental investigation, so you can quickly get an idea in the near term of cost and remediation requirements and clarify potential use or reuse or disposition of the property. And this, so that, could be turned around quickly if it's budgeted for immediately. Second comment is that may be a viable, feasible location for relocation of fire services. Keeping that option open or proceeding with that option would hedge your decision making around the hub facility for public works, keeping open both options of a downsized amalgamation property only for public works or resurrection and refurbishment of the Nauvoo Road property. So you're separating out the two issues, and your land acquisition would be brought down and the budget would be brought down in the amalgamation scenario. So it might also have that benefit. An amalgamation of all three properties, of course, is a larger land footprint with conflicting requirements on location, and you may or may not be able to do that, but reusing land that you own is a smart strategy, because any scenario is going to, you're going to be confronted with capital constraints going forward, regardless of how it's phased. So those are my comments.
Okay, well, I think we covered a lot of ground tonight, and I think Councillor Westgate has made a great suggestion as far as having some time to think about this and perhaps really mull it over before any set discussions are made. Amanda, is there anything else that needs to be covered? I think we have bylaws tonight.
I might suggest, just for procedure, Mayor Brumbaugh, just a receipt and file of both reports from CBRE and MDE consultants, just for our records. And then, yes, I think the only other outstanding item is just bylaws.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Mitchell, were you making the motion to receive and file both those reports?
I'll make the motion, Madam Mayor. Yep.
And Councillor Morris, did I see your hand up? Okay, all in favor of receiving and filing those reports? Thank you very much. And bylaws?
That bylaw number 5 of 2002 be read a first and second time.
That is moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Westgate. All in favor? That is carried.
And that bylaw number 5 of 2002 be read a third time and finally passed.
Moved by Councillor Morris, seconded by Councillor White. All in favor? That is carried. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and for the thoroughness of this report. These reports gives us a lot to think about. I'd also like to thank Chief Sitlington for his input, because we really value your opinion on all of this. If there's nothing else, we will need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Chief Sitlington, no. Moved by Councillor Westgate, seconded by Councillor Mitchell. All in favor? Thank you for that, Rick. I needed that. That is carried. Thank you so much, everybody, for this meeting, and we've got a lot to think about.
Good night, all.